Hi folks, I'm Joel from Agility. Today we're going to be talking about content models. And one of the things that you can do when you want to learn about content models is you then look at content architecture. If you check out our documentation site, we've got all kinds of stuff on content architecture, and you can actually click the link at the top to download an ebook that gives you an introduction to content architecture. But today we're actually going to go through a pretty high level look at content models and how they work specifically in Agility. And we're even going to go ahead and create a content model based on a pretty basic requirement. So let's look at what a content model actually is in Agility. So whereas when you, as an author, when you go to create content, if that content hasn't been defined in a model, you can't create it yet. So if I want to start, creating a content item, I need to make sure that I have a container to contain those items and a model that defines the field that that item is going to have. If all of that has been set up, awesome. As a content author, you can go ahead and create items in that container. But if you haven't started with that yet, or if you have a new kind of content that you want to work with, you have to start with the model, in which case you have to define those fields. So let's look at a particularly simple example of, say I wanted to have a team listing on my page. Okay, so if I needed to define my list of what the fields are for going to be in my team. So I might need a name as a field. I might need a LinkedIn handle, maybe a photo, maybe a bio. These fields are, you come up with that based on your requirements for that content. I wouldn't go too low level with those when you're setting those up, and that's where the sort of the art of content architecture comes in. But I wouldn't be too design driven either. So sometimes folks will look at a design and think, oh, we need these fields, but you should have a little bit of a future thought with that, to saying, what fields might I need to define in the future for these? But also don't go too crazy. We don't need to have things like date of birth or other information about an employee. We don't want to put personal information in there. Probably don't want to put their email address in there, for instance, because we don't necessarily want to publish that on our website. Okay, so this is only for what we need to have as content that we want to publish for the world. So we defined that in the model. So this dark purple sets up an employee model. Okay, this is just an example. And then we can create a container with a list of all the team members. Okay, so I could call this maybe team members. But I could also create another container. Maybe I wanted to have another container for something like maybe my team leaders or the executives or something like that, because sometimes that will be on a different spot. If this has the same requirements, if the same fields, I can actually create multiple containers with the same model. And that sets up a lot of different useful things in Agility, but sometimes it's just one-to-one, and that's okay too. You set up the model, you set up the container, and then authors can go ahead and create items in that container. Let's see what this looks like actually in Agility itself. So I've created an instance here, and you can see I don't have anything for employee listings or anything like that, but I have created a content group by clicking Add Group, and just created a group called employees. So that's what we're going to put in there. Now, from here, I can't do that. I can't create a model from the content area. We've done that on purpose, so to kind of separate what a content architect or a content strategist is going to do versus what an author is going to do. So if I need to create a content model, I need to go into the models section of Agility. And inside here, there's a whole quick start guide to kind of get you started in a walkthrough video. But let's just dive into creating a content model. So we're going to go into the content model section and click create new model. And we're going to call this, I'm going to refer back to my diagram. Having a diagram for this is really helpful, by the way. So we're going to call this employee. All right. Employee. And you'll find that naming things can be really hard. So it's good to have a discussion with your team about what you're going to name your content models and your fields before you get started. So that you have a sort of a document that you can refer to and argue about what's going on in the document when you're going to name things. And then when you're plugging it into Agility, it makes it a lot faster. So now we need to create 4 fields. We need a name, a LinkedIn handle, a photo, and a bio. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use a text field for the name, and choosing the field type and the field names can be important. You can see as I type into the label, it automatically populates the name, which is pretty cool. Probably want to do, the person's full name. It's good to have a description in here. And then you want to choose, is this a required field? And you think about it, can I have an employee without a name? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's make that required. Looking at the advanced tab, we can set a max length on this. So probably don't want to have someone with a name longer than 100 characters. Probably doesn't make any sense. I don't need a default value. Don't want to hide this. Okay, there we go. Name fields all set up. let's go with, now we want to have, I think it's LinkedIn handle. So let's drop that on there. So LinkedIn handle, and you can see as I type in the label, it takes the spaces out of the name because the field name doesn't make sense with spaces in it. And so the handle of the LinkedIn handle for this user. Even if the description is obvious, it's good to get in a habit of using descriptions. Does everyone need to have a LinkedIn handle? Let's not make this required. And if it's not required though, then our code that we use to render this needs to be adaptable to allow for this value to be empty. So that's just an important thing to understand. We probably want to set a max length for this. I can't see anyone having a LinkedIn handle longer than 100 characters. So that's just a good thing to do too. It's always good to have some sort of like some validation that's happening here. Okay, so we've got the name, the LinkedIn handle. I think we needed a photo. Okay, so we need a photo for this person. That makes sense for it to be an image field. You can see along the right, there's lots of different kinds of fields. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see there's an image field. You can also search for it if you want to just find it really quickly. So we got an image field in there. We're going to call this photo. We're going to make it required. Let's think about this for a second. If I had a listing of employees and if I didn't have a photo for an employee, I could create, that sort of generic gray outline of a head that's on there, but I don't really like that. So if I make this required, then someone has to put a photo in. But let's keep thinking even further. If I make it required and they don't have a photo of that person, they'll probably just go and download a generic photo and put it in here. So you know what? Let's make it not required so that as a developer, I can choose what the generic photo is. I don't have to deal with a bunch of kind of like fake photos that are in here. So use a good headshot. If the person doesn't have one, leave it blank, and we will show a generic image. So it's good to give your authors a heads up about what you're doing. Now, since we're on an image, you're going to see lots of different kinds of field properties that are on there based on this file type. And this is important, especially on an image, because the types of files that are available are different. And we probably don't want an SVG because that's really like a vector graphic format. That's more for like drawings. And we probably don't want a GIF because I don't want to have an animated, although that would be kind of funny. Probably just want to have JPEGs, maybe they're PNGs. That's fine. We can also put, hey, it needs to be certain height, certain width. I'm not going to put that on there right now, but you can certainly use that in your settings. Okay. So we've got a name, LinkedIn handle, photo. The last one we needed was a bio, right? So I'm going to use a long text or multi-line text field because a bio might have multiple lines. I'm just going to call it bio. And the person's bio. Keep it short, fairly short. If I could type, it would be better. Oh my goodness, fairly short. And let's make it required. Have to have a bio. I think that makes sense. We can set a maximum length. Let's set maybe 1,000 characters for that. Here we go. So we've created the model. Now, and you can see even with 4 fields, that still took us, it took us a few minutes after we'd already figured it out. So you might want to think about some of the properties for these things when you're designing it in your document. Maybe you want to have, this is a FigJam, for instance. You might want to have a little more information just when you're talking about this, when you're writing it out, just in kind of a notes format for all the field types and the lengths. How long should we do it? Because if you get into plugging these values into Agility and you have to go back to your team to ask more questions, it's going to take a lot more time. Or you might just end up making a lot of assumptions that your team didn't necessarily agree on. So while I don't really think that committees need to decide everything, sometimes it's good to discuss stuff beforehand to make sure that everyone agrees on it. All right, so we've created the model. Now this does not create any containers, okay? So this is the usage tab, and you can see that we don't have any containers that are defined. That means if I'm in the content area, there's no containers set up that actually have these kinds of content items in there, okay? I have to create that from the models section. So we see here, we have our employee should show up, there it is. Okay, we have our employee type, it's not used anywhere, so we create that from the model itself. So you set up the model, And from there, you create the containers. All right. Some might seem a little unintuitive at first, but what it means is that we don't have authors accidentally creating models when those already exist. So you want to set up all the content architecture and all the models for your instance from the model section and sort of make sure that that's all well defined. Okay. So we're going to call our first container, we're going to call it team members. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. Team members, and we're going to put it in the employees group. We're not going to restrict it to a single item, right? We have more than one team member on our list. So let's go ahead and create that container. So that will now show up in the content area. But while we're here, we might as well go ahead and create the executives list as well. Let's go and do that. Executives, and we'll put that in the employees group as well. Go ahead, create that container. And I could either go to the content area, or when you're on the model, you can link directly to it from here. So let's jump right into the team members list. And it's always good to kind of test out your model beforehand. So by default in this listing, by the way, it uses the first text field. It uses the first field that I defined as the first column, and the default columns are the modified date, modified by, and status. The user has the ability to change those columns based on what you put in the model. So I can choose any text field essentially to go in there. So if I wanted to add the bio, someone can choose to do that. That's all fine and dandy. So, but we don't have any items in here yet. Let's try creating this. And it's always good to test out your models before sort of giving them out to your authors to say, hey, go ahead and plug in some content. So let's just go and create something. And you can see as I type, it shows me how many characters I had. If there was a character limit set up, I can hover over the I to make sure I have, a good sort of description of what this field is all about. And so that's pretty good. I think that makes sense. LinkedIn handle, my LinkedIn handle is Joel Vardy. So now when this is being output, right, someone's going to build the LinkedIn URL for that. It's not required. So if I didn't have this, it's okay. My required field has a little red star beside it. So if I actually tried to save this right now, it would not save because and it tells me down below, the bio is required. Okay. So I'm going to type this out, Joel Vardy. Photo. Geez, do I have a photo of myself? Let's see if I can find one. This might be embarrassing. That's not bad. Let's choose a square one. Yeah, pretty nice photo I had taken back in 2019, pre-COVID days. So this is going to upload into here, and it actually, what it does is it will show me a thumbnail, but it actually gives this a unique URL. So when you upload an image in Agility through the content item, it uploads it and puts it into the assets library. So that's all set up. I could use an alt text for this, but the alt text isn't required, so I'm not going to fill it out. That's something you want to think about in terms of accessibility and SEO. Do you want to require alt text? But the other thing that could happen is this has the name on it. So the alt text really should be done by the developer. When they output this thing, they could just put the name in the alt text in the alt field. So that could happen. This is all about Joel. All right, so I could put my bio in there and multiple lines. Another line is okay. And you can see it gives me my character count as I type. And let's go ahead and save this now. And in theory, everything should be okay, and this works. All right, so now we have our first item in this list that is set up. It takes a second to show up here, but that's okay. So we're all set to go. And if I search, obviously it's going to find Joel. And another cool thing about the content modeling is we have the ability to add pretty complex filters. So if you wanted to filter based on like the LinkedIn handle, I could go ahead and do that as well. And filter based on that. I could add my LinkedIn handle as a column in this because that might be useful. So I pop that in there. And now if I scroll over to the right, I can see the LinkedIn handle. Let's move this over to the second column. And there, that's pretty cool. So now I actually have, multiple columns that are available. I can collapse this and see more stuff. Oops, I moved the status by accident. Hang on. Okay, now we're all good. So you can set up your lists however you like. And this is actually a personal setting. So this will be set up for me. Other people might have, the preference of how they want to set up their list and how they want to do their filtering. So all of that stuff is sort of something that you can do, but a lot of it is driven by the model. And this is a pretty basic model that's been set up, but now this content is available to be used throughout the site. And we'll have more videos coming forward where we can show how to link different kinds of models and content together using something called content relationships. But we'll talk about that in another video.